Because religion has always been involved in the schools. Ever since we've had public schools, religion has played a part. But as we grow, we find out that maybe some things maybe aren't acceptable. And I know you think, well, I can't understand that. But how about this? Remember one time we didn't let women vote. We had segregated schools. And so you can see that we change as scenarios and situations come up, and we go back. So let's talk about religion a little while. And what I will tell you, number one, is can you pray at school? That's one question we will look at. I always like to tell people that yes, that as long as you give a test, there'll be students praying that they pass because they didn't study. You know? So we know that you can have prayer at school. Number two, can religious organizations use school facilities, or is that promoting religion? Number three, can Bible be taught at school? And number four, can students write about Christianity as an assignment? We've already talked about self-righteous and him giving an assignment. But can students actually write about that? And can a teacher openly display a Bible on the desk? And we talked about that. And my belief, and I'm not an attorney, so I want to get that clear right now. If you want legal advice, you go and pay an attorney for that. But I would say that in most situations, you can display a Bible. I have learned from attorneys that what they will say when you ask them a question is they say, it depends. And it does depend on all the facts of the situation, what the evidence is and all of that. But I would say if there's not been any complaints about you having a Bible on your desk, you're probably okay. But if you're picking it up every day and thumping it, patting it and saying, kids, y'all need to read this every day, then you might be promoting religion at that time. But then I'm going to have to tell you to put the Bible up. But certainly display on your desk, I would say it's the same thing if you wear a Christian symbol on your necklace or earrings with a cross or something of that sort. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk about the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, which we've already talked about with the Establishment Clause, that some of you all mentioned, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting it, therefore. So what they're really saying, you can't promote it, but you can't prevent it. So as an administrator or an educator, you're kind of on a balancing act, and if you go too far, then people saying you're promoting religion. If you go the other way, they might want to say that you're prohibiting religion. And we have to be neutral because we are the public schools, and we require every kid to come to school unless they're enrolled in a private school, parochial school, something of that sort. But bottom line is kids have to come to school. They don't have a choice. So it requires neutrality from government, prohibits the advancement of religion. And then the second part of the clause, the free exercise clause, that says you cannot, as a government agency, interfere with religious expression. There's a delicate balance with school officials. One person's establishment clause may inhibit another person's free exercise clause. Now, what I'd like to really tell you about that is if you think about it, some parents will say, well, you know what the problem is in public schools are now? They took the Bible out of schools. They took religion out of schools. That's why we have so many problems in school. And then you have other parents that say, you don't need to be teaching my kid religion in school. That's my job. That's the church's job. It's not your job. So you can't win either way because there are strong feelings both ways. Now, naturally, being in the South and being in the Bible Belt, you probably have more people that are in favor of religion than not. But think about it this way. How many of you would want a teacher to teach your child sex education? Most of you probably would. There'd be some parents that say, absolutely not. That's my role, and I don't want you trying to teach my kid anything about sex. And particularly when we start dispensing birth control pills and dispensing other things as well. So you just have to really be careful of something like that. And then, like I said, you got administrators are caught between those who wish to bring religion back into schools and those that believe there ought to be a religious-free zone. And don't forget, Megan, at about 6:30, 6:40, we'll take a break if you'll remind me, okay? We'll just stop in the middle of this. All right. we actually had 4 major shifts that I'd kind of like to talk just a little bit about as we talk about religion. But first of all was after the Civil War, and I like to call it the War of Northern Aggression. But after the Civil War, the Bill of Rights were applied to national governments and states. You remember that one of the issues was that the states had their sovereign immunity and they ought to be to make all decisions. And then there was the government saying, no, we as the federal government, we've got to be in charge and we've got to set the laws that you follow. You can certainly do others, but that was part of the contingent. But we all will agree now that federal law supersedes any state law because the federal law are the big dogs, in this. Secondly, we also happen to have Supreme Court rulings that give us guidelines because the law, as you see, is great in some areas. And particularly when we talked about the board member that wanted to have a policy, and it gets to be a little bit gray. And so we sometimes have to go to court. They listen to the facts of the case, and then they make a ruling, whether it's a district court, a superior court, state Supreme Court, federal court. And then, of course, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was really huge because we're all taught about how God created Earth. And then all of a sudden we get into a scientific theory that is certainly different from what we believe in the church. And then we talked a little bit about it, and we'll talk a little bit more in length about it later on. Y'all will talk about the Equal Access Act of 1984. Now, again, that's now 35 years old. That law was passed before any of y'all were even born. But, it's been 35 years, okay? Now, all right, and then the 14th Amendment, it was passed in 1866, is even before I was born. And it's applied the protections of the Bill of Rights to state actions. And we're going to start off with our religion in 1962, like I said, before any of y'all were born, because we're kind of showing the progress. In fact, there was really one before this where the Supreme Court had come up and said every child must attend school, mandatory, and you must attend the public schools. And the Pierce Society of Sisters was a nun convent. They had a school, and they brought suit saying you can't make people go to public school if they want to go to private school, and they did win. So there have always been court cases and religion in the middle of it. But Engel versus Patel in 1962, the state of New York required a prayer to be said aloud each day by each class. That was the law of New York. And all they said was, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. Nothing, I don't think, that was really way out of hand, just acknowledging God and acknowledging blessings. Well, some parents brought suit saying that this use of official prayer was contrary to their beliefs and violated the First Amendment, which was promoting religion. So these 10 parents sued in the state of New York. How do you think the courts ruled?
In favor of the parents.
In favor of the parents, absolutely. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the parents and said you've got to stop forcing prayer on people. It's mandatory they come to school, and then you're trying to promote religion and force it on them. All right, and then, just a year later, Shemp of the School District of Abington Township versus Shemp and Murray versus Kirtland. These are two cases that they combined. One was in Maryland, and I think the other was in Pennsylvania, and they just combined them as they went to the Supreme Court. And again, the Pennsylvania law required at least 10 verses from the Holy Bible to be read without comment at the beginning of each day. They weren't doing that, but just reading it.
Any particular verses?
And,
Stuff from Leviticus.
and then they had to say the Lord's Prayer. That was it. And Maryland required reading a chapter in the Holy Bible and then reciting the Lord's Prayer. Of course, parents complained, filed a lawsuit, it went to court. How do you think the courts ruled? Ruled for the parents, you're exactly right. And this was in the early 60s. And sometimes when these things happen, Supreme Court, it still takes a while for people to accept the decision, to learn what's right, what's wrong, and I'm not gonna say circumvent, but kind of work around it. And to give you maybe a better example of that, if you remember, and I don't know if we'll get to this with desegregation, but with Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, that was first filed, I think, in like 1954. Well, it took 12 years really for some of the South to integrate, and even then, there were all kinds of tricks on how they would get around that. They'd say, well, we're gonna give schools a choice, and you can go to either school you want to go to, or they would say, let's see what else they would do, or maybe they would, rezone, or really sometimes they established private schools, but gave them state money, because that was done in several states, particularly in Virginia when it first started. So you go to see that sometimes it takes a while for things to happen, and we still have not resolved all the problems, and we've had other laws like 1984 to kind of give us some guidelines too. Also in 71 with Lemon versus Kirkman. But here's another court case, Epperson versus Arkansas in 1968. Arkansas law forbade the teaching of evolution. We're not going to talk about Charles Darwin because we're going to talk about how God created heaven and earth and how he formed Adam and then stole a rib and made Eve, right? And so that's all we're going to teach in school. Of course, the court struck down the law because all they were doing was promoting religion. Then we had Lemon versus Kirkland in 1971. They kind of started saying, well, you know, we're getting a lot of these religious cases, and we probably need to give some guidelines so people will maybe, at least schools will maybe have some type of rules to follow instead of trying to figure out what we're saying. And the question that what came about, is it legal for government to provide aid to religious schools? Particularly up north, and I'm not picking on Lane, but a lot of money went to a lot of the Catholic schools back during that time because they were very popular. A lot of people went to them and paid taxes, and so there was nothing, nobody thought anything bad about giving money to some of the private schools with that. And Pennsylvania allowed the superintendent to pay salaries of private school teachers at the Catholic school as long as they used secular materials and taught only courses offered in the public schools. So what they're saying is, look, as long as you're not promoting religion and as long as you're teaching the same courses we're teaching, we can give you money. And I know that's, golly, I can't believe that we're doing that. But I'm going to give you an example of how we're doing that in Georgia now. Not necessarily maybe got the same thing, but we're kind of doing an end run on some things. And we'll talk about that a little later on too, maybe in another topic. So they came with a three-pronged test known as the Lemon test. You know, I think it's funny that it's lemon because, you know, lemon's kind of sour. Anyhow, you have to have a secular purpose. When you're doing something at school, it has to be secular in purpose, not a religious purpose. Number two, just like the First Amendment says, you can't prohibit religion, but you can't advance religion. And then third, it does not foster excessive entanglement with religion. Now, it must not violate any of these three principles. In other words, if you meet two of them and not the third one, then you're violating. You have to meet all three.
Doesn't then question what is excessive?
That's for the courts to determine. That's why you need attorneys. You're exactly right. Good point, Mike. All right, so the lemon test, like I said, that's the important one we have. And I'm going to give you a couple of court cases. Again, we're moving on. Stone versus Graham in 1980. Kentucky statute required the posting of the 10 Commandments purchased with private contributions on the wall of each public school. Not using any state money, we're getting private donations to put things on the walls at the schools. What do you think?
That's not going to work.
Really illegal because it doesn't have a secular purpose. If you got the 10 Commandments, that pretty much is saying this is what we believe in religion. This is the commandments that Moses brought down, right? And then Aguilar versus Felton in 1985. the use of Title I funds to pay salaries of parochial school teachers. Again, we're still trying to pay salaries. These teachers only work with disadvantaged children, you know, kind of like the Title I, you know, so we've taken out Title I funds and paid. And the court rules it was illegal, 1985. We've done an about face with that now, and quite frankly, now when each school district gets their federal funds, they're supposed to write every private and parochial school in their district and say, we have received Title I funds. Do you wish to have some or your portion of the Title I funds? Now, most schools will say no because they know if they do it, they've got to follow certain strings and federal guidelines. And so most don't, but the school districts are required to do it. You can call your Title I person now and ask them if they have to contact by letter these school districts every year, not schools, these schools every year. If they say no, let me know and I'll call the federal government and they'll start doing it, okay? All right, now, Wallace versus Jaffrey, also 1985, Alabama state law authorized a 1-minute period of silence in all public schools. Does that sound familiar?
Oh.
But remember, this is Alabama. Excuse me, I got one. Alabama, excuse me, okay. All right, so over the next few years, the statute evolved to authorize teachers to lead willing students in a prescribed prayer. So when they moved to that, then that made it illegal. Board of Education versus Burgess, 1990, and we'll get to this later on, but remember the Equal Access was passed in 1984, and this is 1990, and they're saying that equal access does not violate the Establishment Clause, and schools that have established a limited forum must allow student-led groups the same access to facilities, bulletin boards, and other clubs and activities. What was happening is because in the 60s and 70s and 80s, school districts were being hit with suits. And they got, well, we just aren't going to do anything. And we'll talk about the Equal Access Clause, but even after that was passed, some of the schools still weren't doing what the law said, and so Emergence brought a lawsuit against one of the school districts saying, you're not following the Equal Access Act. And so that's when it kind of got to be really noticed. And then as we move up, Lee versus Wiseman, 1992, not that long ago, most of y'all were born by then. A parent and a student challenged the practice in a Rhode Island school to invite clergy to offer an invocation and a benediction at graduation. Now this school district, they rotated. They maybe would use an Episcopalian and a Catholic one year, a Methodist and a Baptist another year, and one of the other kinds. I'm not trying to slight the Lutherans and the Jewish and all that, but I mean every year they would rotate and have somebody. And the court ruled that graduation was an important event in the lives of students, and some were being coerced into religious activities such as prayer. Now, Patrick did tell the truth that we don't require you to attend graduation. You can just go back and pick up your diploma. And it's done much more with the colleges than it is with the high school. But here's what I would tell you and argue. These children, under the age of 18, gave up 12 to 13 years of their life. Yeah, 14 and 15, you're exactly right, to earn their high school diploma. That is a huge event in their life. And so naturally, most of them want to attend, their parents want them to attend, and they should not be exposed to religious situations there because they basically are attending because it's a proud moment for everybody, okay? Now, and then we go with 1997, Augustini versus Felton changed a little bit. That overruled the Aguilar versus Felton by ruling the use of Title I funds was permissible to allow public school teachers to teach at religious schools. But also, we can give money to schools. Even now today in Georgia, would you say that there's money that goes to private schools that is state money? You don't think so?
I said I would think so.
Oh, yeah, they do. And that kind of bothers me, it really does, because they have a whole different set of laws. But the way they do it now, they say, we're trying to benefit the child. This is what we're doing. We're benefiting the child. We're not taking a religious view. We're not saying that, right, we want to give money to Catholics. We're saying every child in the state deserves an education. And to benefit each child, we'll provide money so that they can get an education. All right. And the instruction material must be secular and neutral in nature, certainly if you're in Title I funds. In Edwards versus Aguilar, back in 1987, we're back up this minute, the Louisiana statute, excuse us, misspelled, that forbade the teaching of evolution unless accompanied by instruction in the creation of science. In other words, they did what, they said, okay, if you could teach one, you could teach the other. And again, the court ruled it endorsed religion because they required them to teach the creation science. Good News Club versus Milford Central School. I'll bring this one up only to say this, that the Good News Club sometimes are known as wanting to use school facilities, wanting to participate in promote religion, and if you don't let them, they'll bring a lawsuit. And I don't mean that in an ugly way, but they pretty much get involved in some of the lawsuits. And some of you have Good News Clubs in your schools now. I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just saying that if the Good News Clubs approaches, you better cross your T's and dot your I's and make sure you're following the law. And the court ruled as discrimination with school policy or practice that will allow non-sectarian groups to use school facilities and disallow religious groups equal access. Remember, the equal access law was passed in 1984. Other religious activities, displays, a large picture of Jesus Christ in the hallway. Illegal, because it endorsed religion, right? Halloween, Dahlia versus School Board of Alachua County. Symbols did not constitute an establishment of religion. Now remember, some people, they look at Halloween as a celebration of witches and that you're devil worshiping. And so that's kind of what brought that suit. But the court said, oh, not really. You know, Halloween is kind of a festival, a holiday that's not promoting religion, even though some people will tell you it does. And then in music, you can include, hymns and religious music in your school concerts. It's legal to do that. All right, prayer football games in 2007. I think y'all talked about that. Santa Fe, it was student-led and student-initiated, but they still said it violated the Establishment Clause. Now, that's California. That's in a different circuit than Georgia, to win the Ninth Circuit. And, in California, it's the land of fruits and nuts. And so we have to worry more about Georgia, and there's nothing wrong. You have to worry more about Georgia and Alabama and that group, okay? Now, release and shared time religious instruction. I'm moving back now to 1948 just to give you some examples. It invalidated a plan under which separate Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish religious classes were taught in the public school buildings. Now again, this is 1948 before we started having, the lawsuits in the 60s. And that what they do with school got here, if you were Jewish, you'd go to one classroom. If you were Catholic, you go to another. If you were Protestant, and they would teach religion in the schools. And that was certainly ruled against it. Then Zork versus Clausen upheld a plan where students were released during public schools hours to attend religious instruction classes off campus. That is still allowed today. You can release students to go off campus to get some type of religious instruction. I imagine maybe the Jewish community, maybe you could release for bar mitzvah. I don't know a whole bunch about that, but the bottom line is this: you can't release the student from physics and then give them credit for physics. That's not the way it is. It's kind of like you would schedule a study hall during that time where they wouldn't earn credit from the school district during that time. But we have kids that even now they get early release and go to work, right? And so that certainly is allowed. In fact, at one time, and I don't know any school that does it now, but they used to even release kids to go have music lessons, piano lessons, and things of that sort. Y'all still do it? They have beautiful.
They do it right in the school. They have one of the a lady who teaches piano lessons, and you can miss like your connections classes once a week to go get your piano lessons.
Okay. So she's using school facilities to make money.
For 5 or 6 years, we had kids released from Shiloh to go to an elective class taught at a church, paid for by the church.
Yeah, and you know, and actually, you could
Elective
even,
credit.
you could probably allow elective credit if that teacher was certified. But now, with the waiver of certification, they don't even have to be certified, and you could still probably get them some type of credit. You probably wanted to get a clearance certificate issued by the PSC to make it legal, but certainly you could do that. All right, and then, let's see, you can't allow release time and have no activity for students not participating. In other words, if you have release time for religion, and you let other people go, you can't just let the other kids that don't want to leave have study hall. You've got to have some type of planned instruction for them. And the reason for that is because you're making them stand out, you know, and you're almost forcing them to go and do something. And then you can offer a course in the Bible. It must be secular in nature and intent and purpose, does not advance or inhibit religion, offered in a manner that does not entangle government religion. Most people teach the Bible, if they're true to teach the Bible, as a work of literature, you know. And some teach several religions, and so they're just kind of given a preview of all kinds of religions, and that kind of is more or less a world history type of thing. And we will stop right here for a few minutes, let y'all take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the Equal Access Act, because as I said, that was one of the more important laws that we've had, and you'll see how this affected us. Okay, let's take about a 10-minute break. All right, so we're going to talk about the Equal Access Act of 1984, and it helps to turn it on. And this is passed in response to public pressure and lobbying by Christian groups. So in other words, what happened was, as I mentioned to you, schools were kind of afraid to house anything or do anything with religion, because every time they turned around, somebody was being sued. So they weren't letting religious groups utilize the school facilities. And so people started lobbying their legislators saying, you need to fix this. We need to have a law making it fine for religious groups to use school facilities. And so, lo and behold, they came with a wonderful idea to help our fine Christian citizens of the United States. And now this law applies only to public secondary schools that allow non-curricular clubs to meet outside the school day or during another non-instructional time. What I mean by that, there are some school systems, particularly in the Midwest, that was very sparsely populated, that because kids live 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away from school, if they want to participate in the club, they're almost prohibited. So they kind of build in maybe a period each day or twice a week for them to participate. So that would be where you're in a non-curricular club, you know, during non-instructional time. But we also have non-instructional clubs that meet after school, right? In most school systems. And now, would we say that the Spanish Club, is that an instructional organization or a non-curricular?
Theoretically instructional.
Theoretically, it's right. I would agree with you. You're exactly right.
Realistically, they each is.
That's true too. But I would argue that Spanish Club is for those who take Spanish and it's academic. Now, how about Beta Club? I would kind of say that's a stretch for Beta Club, because it's also a service organization as well. Now, National Honor Society, I may could argue a little bit better, but for Beta Club, I would say, well, it's not really academic. You have to have certain grades to get in, but you gotta have certain grades to participate in sports. So I would say that's probably more of a non-curricular club. Again, you know, tell me the facts, let an attorney decide, and let the courts decide. But I would argue with you that probably Beta Club that most school districts have is probably a non-curricular club. Can somebody maybe think of another club that maybe be non-curricular that's in the high schools?
Chess club.
Chess club?
Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Fellowship of Christian Athletes, absolutely. So those are, what I'm trying to say is that probably most high schools have some type of non-curricular clubs. And we're gonna talk about the three types of forums that you can have, because the law kind of defines that. But it says a forum is a place and speech rights to be determined by the nature of the place. I'll give you an example. A limited open forum, that's limited, you've limited to certain times, that's probably what most schools do. You limit the time that they can have that after school, before school, maybe you've got a designated activity period or something of that sort in which they do. And because of that, you can have certain types of restriction as long as it's related to the mission of school. So you have a little bit of flexibility there. But like I said, most schools, and remember I'm talking about secondary schools, high schools, they are what I would call limited open forum. A closed forum doesn't allow for any non-curricular clubs and organizations. They just said, nope, we're all about academics, and that's all we're doing. And then you have what is known as an open forum, and that's normally public parks where it's open. I mean, you've seen people get up and, what's one of the parks in Atlanta? Piedmont. You know, people get up there, maybe they'll preach, or they'll get up there and talk about the earth's coming to an end, or whatever. I mean, it's an open forum there. People come at any time and, you know, and provide viewpoints, pass out literature, because this is an open forum, basically. I mean, they can't break the law, but they, I mean, like streaking or something of that sort to do something, but I mean, they can, but it'd be violating the law. But basically, an open forum is where you can, at any time, you know, present points of view. Now, the Equal Access said must allow clubs to be organized. You must have them as long as, number one, the meeting is voluntary and student initiated, kind of like prayer. You have to have students and they have to initiate it. Number two, teachers or other school employees do not sponsor the group. And you know, it's all about lingo, because we still talk about teachers being sponsors and all that, but they're really not. They're a supervisor of the organization, because it's supposed to be student-led, student-initiated if it's a non-curricular club. But just, you know, old habits never die, so you'll hear the word sponsor sometimes. Yeah, we still say that they do that. But school employees don't promote, lead, or participate in the meeting. However, you are there to make sure that they're not tearing up the school. I mean, that's one reason you have a supervisor of the club, is because we need to have an adult school employee there when students are meeting. Otherwise, they could have an orgy, they could have a big keg party, and we can't allow that in schools. So that's why you're preventing things from happening that don't need to be happening, okay? And then school employees are present at religious meetings only in the supervisor non-participatory capacity. In other words, if I'm a member if I'm sponsoring or if I'm in charge of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, quite frankly, it's not my job to get up there and read the devotional or read the scripture or whatever. My job is to say, Patrick, you're the president of this club. What do you want to, let's sit down and plan next week's meeting. And Patrick say, well, I've got Mike to do the invocation, and I've gotten Jonah, she's going to read a little bit of scripture, and then Wayne's going to close us with a prayer. Well, it's been initiated by the students, he's planned it, and all I've done is just make sure everything is okay. The meeting does not materially or substantially interfere with the orderly conduct of educational activities within the school. So if you're having school activities, or if it's during the school day, and all of a sudden these kids start running up and down the hallway, and they got these scooters that they're, you know, racing and doing it, then that would probably be disruptive to other places. And you could stop it at that point in time because it's disruptive. But if they're actually having a meeting like this in the school and student-led, it's okay. Non-school persons may not direct, conduct, control, or regularly attend activities of student groups. And think about this, when we have after-school programs sometimes, maybe it's Bible study or whatever, you usually have, and I'll just pick on the Baptist for a change, you usually have the Baptist youth minister that will come and lead it, because he's got a lot of his youth that attend the school and also attend his church, so he's there. Well, theoretically, he is violating the law if he is there every time. So the way you avoid breaking the law is the Baptist youth minister comes one week, the Methodist youth minister comes the next week, the Lutheran one comes in. So in other words, you're rotating. That way, you're not regularly attending, and you've got students that are really directing the program. That's the way it should be. Now, getting to that, we are going to talk about the White County High School Pride versus White County School District. I know a little bit about this lawsuit because guess who was superintendent during this time?
Oh my goodness.
And you go find out that just like with y'all split with the wanting a policy on promoting prayer and not having it, our community was also split, just like at Chestatee High School, where you had people that were certainly much more in favor of it, and certainly they won't, even in Madison County. But I mean, you know, we didn't buy, and you know, some people would buy T-shirts and things. So it's amazing how public schools get involved in a lot of community issues, and it just happens that people congregate there. But I want to say one other thing about the equal access law before that. Remember I told you that the Christian community was the one that wanted this done, and so they did it. Well, the bad or unforeseen happening of that is once you have that limited forum, you can't make a decision on which group uses it and which one doesn't. Because if I want to form a devil's worshiper club, I have a right to do that if it's student initiated. You can't say, well, this is a good club and this is a bad club. If I wanted to have a snake handlers club at the school, and we had 8 or 10 students that loved snakes and wanted to pet them and let them wrap around their arm and all that, I'm not going to sponsor it, but anyhow, I mean, it can be done. So that's what I'm trying to say is that once this law came about, what they didn't realize, it opened the gates for any organization to have that as long as they could follow certain guidelines, like not tearing up the school. All right, students asked to form a club in the middle of the year. Well, we had just hired a high school principal in January. So I'm going to back it up just a little bit and tell you kind of how we got into that situation. About May of the year before, we have a principal that announced his retirement. Well, we did advertising, we conducted, interviews, and we actually brought somebody to graduation night and introduced him to the faculty as the new high school principal. It was hush-hush in her community. She was actually a superintendent in another school district and hated being a superintendent, loved being a high school principal, but hated being a superintendent. So she kind of, on the sly applied, we kind of kept quiet, and she was really an outstanding candidate. Well, we brought her in that night, announced her to the faculty, and she kind of watched graduation, kind of just in the audience, and signed the contract and went back and told her community. Well, she was from that community. She had been educated there. She was a teacher there. She was an assistant principal there. She was an elementary principal there. She was a middle school principal there. She was a high school principal there. She was an assistant superintendent there. She was a superintendent. So she went back and announced that. All hell broke loose. People said, oh, you can't leave us. What are we going to do? You've been with us and blah, 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 this. And she was having some problems with the board, and that community was pretty much split with public school and private school. They had a fairly large contingent of private school people too. And so naturally when you want to have a SPLOST vote or anything happen in schools, you already had a ready-made group that wanted to oppose it. Well, all the people got together and begged her that she would stay, that everything would be wonderful. And so she then called me back about a week later and said, I just can't come to White County. I've got to stay here in my community. They really don't have anybody else. Well, I mean, I certainly don't want a principal that doesn't want to come. And so I certainly released her from the contract, but I said, now let me tell you something, it's been my experience that, you know, leopards don't change spots. That they may be good for about a month or two, but they will get back in their old habits. And sure enough, at the end of that year, she did retire, and then she started working for Orisa, you know, 49%. But what I'm trying to tell you is that because she backed out in the middle of June, and then we had to open up again and you know, advertise, it was July before we started interviewing people. Now tell me, how many good principals want to leave their school in July to come to White County School? And I mean, I think we were a pretty good school district, but let me tell you what, if I had somebody that was applying wanting to come to White County in July, there may be a reason why. Maybe they needed to leave where they were. So we were really unsuccessful in seeing, I even made a couple of phone calls and talked, but it just really, we had one person we talked with, and then he said, well, it's just too late, I can't do that. And remember that when we had narrowed it down, we had narrowed it down to 3, when we were going ready to announce it, we told the other 2 that, well, we're going to make a recommendation. I didn't want them to be blindsided. Well, one of them went and took another job, and certainly another one, you know, sometimes when you're rejected, you don't want to come back and say, oh, let it be me. So anyhow, so I looked around the district. We had the principal retired. We had one assistant principal that was kind of weak. And there was no way in heck I was going to name him as principal. I was actually trying to escort him out the door. It was just going to take a little while. And then we had a second assistant principal that had just been named principal of the 9th grade academy. In other words, we had just that year taken grades 9 through 12, moved the 9th grade to a 9th grade academy because we wanted to improve our graduation rates. And so we'd taken one of the assistant principals and do that. Well, lo and behold, this principal, because he started planning in about February or March, about April, he jumped ship and accepted a real high school principal job, 9 through 12, for the next year. So we took the other assistant principal and named him as the 9th grade academy principal. So that left us, we had a teacher fresh out of the classroom that was an assistant principal. We had one assistant principal a week, one assistant principal just out of the classroom, and no principal. Well, I looked at the middle school, so you know, maybe I could get that. But when I was hired, I was told the middle school was probably the weakest school we had, and we really need to concentrate on that. And we had just the year before finally got 2 assistant principal and principal, and they were working great together. If I had taken one of them and moved to the high school, I would send a message, we don't care about the middle school. So I felt like I couldn't do that. I couldn't take the 9th grade academy person because they'd already lost one, and then would have been talking about the importance. So then, elementary teachers are too smart to want to take a high school job. I mean, you know, they know where the real work is. So anyhow, then I looked at the district office, where we had one person I felt could do it. But that person, she was working on a doctorate, and I think you would probably say it takes a little bit of time if you're in graduate school. Her dad also was having a bout with cancer, and we didn't know how much longer he was going to live, so she was dealing with that. So I felt like, well, I couldn't name her. Well, in a small district, I kept looking around, and I didn't see anybody else except me. And so and I called a retired principal who had been retired about 3 years and asked if she would work 49% and I'd work 49%. But to make it a long story short, trying to be a superintendent half the day and high school principal half the day, I probably did both of them half-assed. So, you know, it was pretty bad. But anyhow, we started advertising again, and we actually did hire somebody that could leave in December and start in January. And that's what he did. And it really, I mean, I had done such a poor job of being the high school principal, I could have hired Attila the Hun, and the faculty would have been happy about it. So they welcomed him with open arms. So he came in January, and that's when the students came and asked to form a club. Of course, they've done their homework. They had already talked with ACLU. They had themselves an attorney. They also knew that in the previous year, we had started 2 clubs in the middle of the year. Because when I got there, like I said, we had a 62% graduation rate at the time. I mean, that's awful. I mean, we didn't have but 20% free and reduced lunch, so it wasn't that all our kids were in poverty. And our vocational classes were not participating in any competitions. And we didn't have a beta club, we didn't have an honor society, and we actually had a person one year and one the next to volunteer to start that club. And I was happy because I wanted us to stress academics. I wanted us to stress service and all that. So, you know, we did those. So those kids knew that we had already established other clubs in another year, so we pretty much were obliged to start that. So anyhow, the school refused, and students stated that other clubs were allowed to form in the middle of the year, and so the board acquiesced for the remainder of the year. At first, the board did not want to allow this, but we had to tell them that it was the law. And you know, I had to try to convince them that we just couldn't deny it. But you have to understand, this is White County, and they thought GSA was Girl Scouts of America, not Gay Straight Alliance. And I know I'm making fun of that, but I'm really not. I'm just kind of making fun of what happened. Remember, this was probably back in the let's see, early 2000s, so it was still pretty new in Georgia to have these clubs and to have a little small school district like it's kind of like right now if you're dealing with a transgender student. That's really the kind of the big issue now that you have. It's almost like back at one time.
That's my AP, I'm
They can come
sorry.
here and finish up the hours. Everything okay?
That's my AP.
Good. All right, we'll chat, thanks. Y'all take the rest of the day off. But anyhow, so we knew we had to let the club go for the remainder of the year, but now you have to understand, White County, they had a church on almost every street corner too. And so there were a lot of people that were very much opposed to allowing high school students have this type of controversial club. We also had an arts community, a little more liberal group of people that thought it was a great idea. So it kind of was splitting the community too. Now, if you want to know the percentage, I'd probably say you were having 70-75% that were opposed, and about 20 or 25% that were felt it was good. Paul Shaw, superintendent, knew that we had to allow it. Our school attorney also knew that, and in fact, as we talked, the school board was adamant that we not have it. We did convince them to let's finish out the year, and what we did, we had a plan that the next year we would have a closed forum, and we would not have any non-instructional clubs to solve the problem and make the little preachers on every corner happy. And it probably wasn't fair to the 4 or 5 students that started this, but I really think the ringleader was just trying to get recognition more than anything else and trying to stir up. But anyhow, so we eliminated all non-curricular clubs, but a suit was filed alleging some non-curricular clubs were still using school facilities. And lo and behold, it probably was right. We kind of principal maybe didn't know about it or did know about it, but we just didn't think about what some people said was non-curricular and what others would think were curricular. And just one example, we had a 4-H club. Well, I would maintain a 4-H club stresses instruction because they really do a lot of science and things of that sort, but that way in the court ruling that we lost, that was one of the things they said was that a 4-H club is not an instructional club. Well, we also had a dance team that would practice after school because they performed during halftime of basketball games, right? Well, I kind of looked at that as athletics. So we had that. We also had a rifle club, but I thought that was associated with ROTC because they were all members of ROTC. We also had some people that didn't cooperate. We had a coach or two that would make fun of this group that wanted to form a club. And we even had one secretary, and she just wasn't thinking. She went to the intercom, she said, okay, I want to remind you, if you want to participate and see you at the poll, which is a religious gathering, which is legal, but it's supposed to be student initiated. But she had to remind everybody, and some people were saying we were promoting religion, but yet we wouldn't let them form a club. So it just really got to where, bottom line, was they did rule in favor of the students. I knew, and the principal knew, that we weren't going to win the case, but our board had said, most of our people who elected us are opposed to this. We've got to take a stand and let the courts overrule us, because then we can face our people and say, we tried, but the law requires us to do that. And I kind of understand that, and as a superintendent, once the board makes a decision, you need to support it. If you can't support it, then you probably need to leave. And so I kind of feel like that I maybe let some of the students down, but I'll still maintain that these students, particularly the ringleader, really just wanted to stir up things. All right, now, I'll just tell you a couple of things about the school. Well, when they went to the court ruling, they also said, well, if you really want to get down to it, athletics, they're using your facilities, and it's not instruction, it's non-curricular. And, I really think the courts ruled right on that. So if we're having athletics, and allowing them to use it, then we gotta let any group that's student-led do that. Now, a couple of things I do want to say. This student, she actually, that year, was named National Lesbian of the Year.
I thought
They have a magazine, and they actually awarded her that honor because she was a student under the age of 18, brave enough to fight the system. And, and I will say, it did take some courage, but I also will tell you this. When she did graduate from high school, and she got a little bit of a scholarship to UGA because of her, quote, leadership capacity, she got pregnant and had to drop out. So that's why I'm saying that she really did some of this for just to get notoriety. But White Candy became noticed. People don't know where White Candy, Cleveland is unless you go and you want to go tubing or go buy your Cabbage Patch Kids. I mean, we had public radio, we had television stations, we actually had a group from Kansas. Their logo or name of it was God Hates Faggots. They came to the school to protest. Now, of course, they couldn't come on the school property, but they, and several of them were attorneys, they knew that they could get a permit and do a demonstration downtown. They were hoping that somebody would prevent them from doing that so that they could, file a lawsuit and gain money. You also had several UGA groups to come down, some opposed, some, I mean, it was, I would get emails every day, and of course the attorney said, Paul, you really can't make any comments, so all I would say was, thanks, your email. And someone would write me back and say, is that all you got to say? But I mean, so it really was a very challenging couple of months that I would put nobody through. In fact, one friend of mine, his daughter was in high school in another county, about 4 or 5 school districts away, but he was in the school business. She happened to ask him one day, she said, well, do you know the superintendent in White County? And his comment was, oh, it was kind of cute, was, yes, I do, but well, I know the next superintendent. Usually when you go through something that contentious, then, they find a new superintendent. But, it all worked out in the end, and it's certainly an experience for me. And, but the bottom line is that each student, and I think it was only about 6 of them, got $5,000 each. And, of course, the worst part, in my opinion, was that we had to provide training, just like with Hall County having some type of training about religion. We had to have sensitivity training because some of our people had made inappropriate comments to students and things of that sort. And like one of the critics said, I'll see you later in class, when it's time for dismissal and things. And it really wasn't fair. We really need to respect all kids. And I would say that, I just was wrong, but sometimes you stand up because you believe this is what your community wants. And at least that's my side of it. And I thought that was the worst part, that for 3 years, we had to have training on sensitivity. The first year I got to that, and in fact, in the laws, the ACLU wanted to tell us who to use for the training. Well, I refused that, and we got somebody from UGA the first year. In the second year, I can't remember, we got somebody different. And in the third year, actually one of our principals did it because he had been trained in sensitivity and he would do it. And so, but it still was something that was, and the other thing is when we did agree to go to the lawsuit, our insurance company did support us, and so they paid, like the court costs and all that. However, understand that once you lose and you pay out money, your premiums are gonna go up, okay? But, so that's the saga of White County and that I did live through it. And, again, I will say that certainly we don't think anything of that, as much today as we did back early in the times. It's more about transgenders is a hot topic now, but back during that time, that was a hot topic, particularly in your rural areas. All right, and because of that, and we'll talk about this when I talk about Georgia laws too, but any Georgia law is, starts with Title 20, is Georgia law. In fact, you know, I told you that we have a book with education. Now remember to bring it this time, an older edition. But this is Georgia school law that contains all the laws pertinent to Georgia. And we'll probably give you a test on it. But anyhow, Georgia 22-705. Each local board of education shall include in the student code of conduct distributed again of each year the school year information regarding clubs and organizations. I call this the White County law because it was passed after we went through that, you know. And so they said, okay, now in your handbooks, and if you'll check those in high school, it should have something listing the clubs. None of that, you're supposed to include the name of the club organization, the mission or purpose, the name of the faculty advisor, not, you know, not sponsor, and a description of past or planned activities. And then a section for the parent to decline their child participating. Now, if the child's 18, they don't need the parent, but they did this to prevent some kids from being, quote, coerced into joining. They can say, well, my parents won't sign for it, you know, give them a way out. So that's in the Georgia law, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. All right, now, I saw that to talk about, okay, what are our permissible activities? Number one, you still legally can release students for off-campus religious instruction during the school day. Now, bottom line, if they've missed 10 classes in physics, they may not be able to get credit for that if they're leaving doing physics. But normally, if a kid's going to leave, they're going to do it during a lunch period, they could do it during a study hall, or they just will not take an elective at that time. You can have a student-led see at the pole, prayer groups, and religious clubs. You can have that at school. Students may express religious belief in homework, art, or other written or oral assignments without penalty. If I would give an assignment to paint the most influential person in your life and do a portrait, if somebody painted a picture of Jesus, that would be acceptable. If I told them they had to paint a bowl of fruit and they painted a picture of Jesus, I don't have to accept it because they did not follow the directions. If I just give a general assignment, then they can certainly do about you. If I say write an essay on what you like to do during your spare time, and somebody writes, I like to attend church and go to prayer meeting and go to choir practice and all that, then that's certainly legal. I mean, you have to accept that. But like I said, if you've given specific objectives and they don't follow those, you don't have to do that. Now, along those same lines, if we're talking about really, if somebody objects to a book that you've assigned in English to the report, a lot of schools already have an alternate plan now. I mean, some people even were against the Harry Potter books because they said it really did promote witchcraft and things. I would say rather than be adamant and say, no, everybody's read that book, you probably do need to have an alternate plan, for a parent that objects that there's too many profanity or they don't agree with the contents of the book. I mean, we've even had some people that have complained about, Tom Sawyer. And then you can reject distribution of hate literature or gang-related symbols. So in other words, if somebody wants to bring brochures and leave at the school for people to pick up on KKK, we don't have to do that because that's a hate group. And a lot of times what we do now, I don't really care what's distributed in the teachers' lounge, all of them are adults, but I do try to control and not have any type of distribution for students, because once you allow one, you gotta allow all. But I just look at it this way, the teachers are adults, and if they don't wanna look at it, throw it in the trash or whatever. Now, questionable activities, something that is kind of, you're on thin ice. Number one, release students for on-campus religious instruction during the day. You're getting a little bit of thin ice if you're allowing that student to go from this room to another room and get religious instruction while others are taking other courses. Now, you can't just have study hall with others, but that's a little, you could probably get away with it because you're not disrupting the day. You might want to call it an elective, but that can be done. Religious displays. Let me ask you a question. Joni, you're elementary, right? 5th grade? Do you decorate during December?
I put lights, but my lights are year round.
Okay. Who else
I
is
don't really-
elementary? Y'all, do you decorate?
I did do Christmas stockings one year, but then I stopped.
No, you didn't do Christmas stockings. You did holiday stockings.
Oh, yeah, I did winter break
There,
stockings.
okay, right.
We call them,
Right answer.
we call them behavior management stockings.
That's fine too, as long as you do. In fact, if you think about it now, when we used to say in December, we're going on Christmas break. What is it now?
Winter break.
Winter break. During Easter, is it Easter break?
Well, it's spring break.
No, spring break. We've kind of had to change our language. It's still basically the same time that we release people from school, but because of the religious connotation, we had to reword it, okay? Religious murals, signs, and advertising, other school-sponsored speech. Again, I'm not saying you can't have your Bible on display, you can't have something else, but you have to be careful, because if it offends somebody, you may have to relook. And then prayer, graduation, and faculty's involved. Now, we talked about that it's student-led, and even that in Santa Fe was frowned upon. Here's what I'm gonna tell you, and I believe this very sincerely. If I am a senior sponsor, and I'm in charge of graduation, and I've got Chris that's gonna be my valedictorian, and he's gonna give the speech, do you think I'm gonna look at it, let Chris practice in front of me and give some advice on that? Probably so. I don't know of a faculty that doesn't at least try to help the valedictorian and salute them if they're making addresses to do that. Same thing, if Wayne's gonna do the prayer, I'm gonna probably wanna hear what he has to say. Well, let me ask you this. If I'm listening and helping and assisting, is it student-led? I would find it hard to say that student-led when the faculty is involved. And so I would tell you that probably just about every high school graduation, in my opinion, is kind of breaking the law. But you can speed on I-85. Unless you're cold, you're probably okay. And I would dare say that probably 95% of your people are really fine with it. And the other 5 probably not going to complain and get ostracized and disrupted. So you're probably okay in the Bible Belt. Distribution of Bibles by Gideons. I can remember we used to provide a time for them to go to the 4th grade classrooms and give them out, or 5th grade, whatever it was. Now, if you want to distribute, you can have them bring, you can leave them on a table, and you can announce to the kids, there are Gideon Bibles on the table in the library or cafeteria. When we dismiss school, if you want to go by and pick up one, you can. The only thing with that, what if the next day somebody wants to advertise Joe's Bar and Grill? And saying we're having special hors d'oeuvres, you may have to do that as well. So what you do for one, you have to do for other because of equal access. All right, 35 states have legislation authorizing or requiring a moment of silence, meditation, or reflection at the beginning of each school day. Is that legal? Is it legal?
Legal, yes.
Yeah, because you haven't said prayer. You've said a moment of silence. Now, I'll ask our private school person, unless she's really public school, Beaufort City, but anyhow, if you're having that moment of silence and you've asked people to stand, and Johnny refuses to stand for the moment of silence, can you discipline him?
Legally?
Yeah, how about that? That word, legally.
No.
You're exactly right. And think about this, because even on television now with some of the athletes, with the playing of the Star Spangled Banner, we have a lot that will kneel or not stand at attention. And I can remember when principals used to go to basketball games and they'd go in the stands and make somebody stand during the national anthem. You can't do that legally. And because everybody has the right. Now, if we're having the moment of silence and Johnny's up there saying, oh, and singing, then you can certainly do that because he's disrupting class. And that's different because you're penalizing not for prayer, but for disrupting class. Okay. Now, religious holidays, when we talked about, we now refer to them as winter and spring break. Moment of silence, you can't even encourage or discourage students from praying. You can't say, all right, during this moment of silence, we need to pray. You can't do that. You can say, we're having a moment of silence. Student-led seed whole gathering before school is legal. Teachers may gather volunteer to pray before and after school. You can get together and pray. You just can't continue praying when it's time for homeroom and say, well, I'm still praying, I can't go and do my duties yet. No, you have to stop and perform your duties. And students, like I said, students may express their beliefs by religion, homework, and other assignments as long as it's meeting the criteria that you established. All right, we are going to talk about vouchers and tax credits a little bit. So remember we were talking about the use of federal funds and how the courts swayed one way and then another way. And I talked about what you can see in Georgia that we kind of do the child benefit theory now. But let's look at vouchers and tax credits a second. And this is public money versus private money. A voucher, a payment the government makes to a parent or an institution on behalf of the parent to be used for the child's education. There are some people that believe that every parent ought to get a voucher and then let them pick and choose where they go to school. It's kind of hard to argue that really when you're forcing a child to go to a school that you wouldn't want your child in. And I don't mean that in an ugly way, but there are some schools that are very non-performing. There are some schools that I consider dangerous. And I wouldn't want my child there. I would certainly do everything I can. But what if you're a parent that doesn't have the means to send your child somewhere? So that, in some ways, I see that as being that. Now, personally, I believe a voucher should be for public schools. But I don't care if it's private schools, if the private schools have to have the same rules and regulations as a school system. That's Paul Shaw's belief. Now, a tax credit, it provides a direct reduction to the tax liability. In other words, you get a credit so you're not paying as much taxes because you've got a credit for, for school expenditures. A tax reduction, basically the same thing. It's a reduction in taxable income made prior to calculating your tax liability. Aid to non-public schools. Everson versus Board of Education Township in 1947, they upheld providing transportation for school students. And really, you think about buses, and really up north now, you have buses, you take the subway and all that. But certainly at one time, if that bus is going right by a school and I'm paying taxes, why shouldn't my child be allowed to ride the bus and get off at a certain stop other than the public school? Mueller versus Allen, 1983, upheld the Minnesota law permitting taxpayers to claim a deduction from gross income on their state income taxes. That was the first law that was passed that way. And then Zeldin versus Harris, and I think this is important, in 2002 upheld a voucher program for low-income and minority students. They gave it and said, the schools in Ohio, particularly the Cleveland area, are awful, and we will give you money if you want to go and pay for your child to get an education somewhere else, then that's fine. And that was 2002, and it was a federal case that they ruled was legal. So that gets us to talking about Georgia's tax credit. It was introduced by David Cassis and Earl Earhart in 2008. Now, put on your thinking caps a minute, what was going on in 2008? Can anybody think about it? Recession, exactly. But yet, here they were coming up with giving some tax credits to people. Now, they designated up to $50 million for tax credits for this for going to schools, and then they kind of bumped up to $58 million. In House Bill 35 passed in 2015, 4 years ago, It's now up to $250 million that's available in tax credits. It allows Georgia individuals and corporations to divert state taxes to nonprofit student scholarships and organizations. Now, legislators will be the first to tell you, oh, it doesn't affect the public schools because it's a tax credit. Well, where do you think that tax dollars goes? If it doesn't go to the schools, where does it go? It's diverted somewhere else, so that's $250 million. If you're talking about 180 school systems, that's at least $1 million for each school system. Now, if you want to do it by percentage, you're probably talking about Gwinnett getting $10 or $15 million. That may be enough to pay one or two teacher salaries, don't you think?
Yeah.
$10 or $15 million? Yeah, you close. And large, these tax credits they give, they're larger than the money we're using to lure film industry, to lure industry to Georgia. We're giving more people to go to non-public schools than we are to clean energy and things of that sort now. When it originally started, it was to help low-income students enroll in better schools, just like they did for handicap. First of all, it started with that, but this was, when it was first initiated, that $50 million, it was supposed to help low-income schools, low-income students go to a better school. But when they talked about better schools, what they really were referring to? Private schools, right? Also known as private schools because that's what they get the money to, so you don't have to go to the public schools. To be eligible, students had to enroll in a public school before transferring, but that's no longer a requirement. But let's think about that a minute. You had to enroll in a public school first. So here's what was happening. Wayne has a child in private school. He's been paying tuition. Not a lick of help. He's been paying. But all of a sudden they pass this tax credit and he can get some help. All he does, he marches his child into school and says to Gwinnett Elementary School, I want to enroll my child in the school. They enroll him, take all the information. The next day, Wayne marches right back to school and says, I want to unenroll my child from the public schools. He then qualifies for the money because all the law said is you had to be enrolled in a public school before transfer. It was in for 1 day. So people serve in it. Now, notice also said it's for low-income students. Well, eventually it got to be, well, these companies, to get tax credits, they were giving money to a particular school, and it might be that in Patrick's company, Patrick would say, okay, I'm going to give money to school, but I want the scholarship money to go to Mike Young's child. Mike would go to the next day to school and say, my company is donating X amount of money, but I want this money to go to Patrick's children. That's not what the law was designed for. It was designed for low-income students, but it was circumvented. So, what happened, there was no oversight. Parents of private schools would enroll students 1 day and then withdraw, but here's another thing. Donations were designed to help specific people. A Southern Education Foundation report highlighted, in a report, they studied this, and highlighted the abuse and lack of accountability. How much do we hear about how the public schools have to be accountable now? Don't we hear about accountability, how teachers have to be accountable, we have to be accountable for taxpayers' money? There's a lack of accountability and the law of abuse. Like I said, Mike and Patrick, kind of cooperating and paying for each other. And so what do you think the legislators did about it?
Nothing.
Well, almost, they did take action. They prevented the public from getting access to this information.
Wow. So
Brilliant.
That you cannot have, and you cannot get an annual audit of this.
Nothing to see here, keep moving.
All right.
Wow.
So that's a little bit of the tax credit programs and things, but it's done to benefit the child. And that's how it's not violating, the laws of religion. All right, now, really it began in the 1980s, and I don't have any problem with homeland instruction for people that do it right. I mean, there are truly people that really want to spend time with their child. Others want to give them, let y'all keep them 24/7. But, and really the reasons for home instruction at the time was, number one, concern with the public school environment. Maybe you lived in a place where the schools were not that good. Or it may be that you want to provide religious and moral upbringing. You didn't want, the schools couldn't do that. A third, you may be dissatisfied with the instruction, the academic program. And fourth, maybe just wanted a non-traditional desire. We have a lot of kids that want to be professional tennis players. They go down to Florida and they practice 6, 7, 8 hours a day and then come and be taught. Or you may still have someone that's fluent wants to travel. Well, they just give them a tutor and just teach them, every day. So, I mean, there's really nothing wrong with that. I would say that what I would tell you is I want the public schools to be good so that parents have a choice. And that's what I always worked at, is that if we had a private school in our school system, fine, I wanted to work hard where I felt like the parents had a choice. And what I really wanted is the parents to say, well, the best choice is go to public school because they have a better program and a wider range of classes to take. And we think about 4% of the people are homeschooled. So we still, and what really confuses me, remember the legislators and me being on my soapbox about they're giving $250 million? I can't understand why 92% of the kids in this state are educated by public schools. Why wouldn't everybody want the public schools to succeed? But it seems like sometimes we're doing all we can to put roadblocks in their way and not be successful so that we can give more money to other schools. All right, Roberts, in most states, you've got to have an equivalent program, and you're supposed to participate in the testing program. I don't believe that's required anymore. To the private school,
You can opt,
huh?
you can opt out.
In private
That's
school,
what I thought. Yeah, you can opt out.
you can opt out in
Right.
public school.
You're supposed to have a minimum of hours and days in record keeping, and a minimum academic requirements to the parents. You know what the academic requirements are?
High school graduate.
GED. As long as you've got a GED, you can legally teach your kids at home.
Wow.
All right, a couple of court cases. Brunel versus Lynn Public Schools in 1998. Courts ruled the homeschool does not require a home visit by public school officials. We all know there's some parents that homeschool their kids, and the only reason they have to take them out of school is because they're getting in trouble and they're getting mad at the teacher or wanting to take them out. And I'm going to tell you what, there's not a lick of instruction going on, very minimal, but yet you can't require them, you can't go and visit them and check. If you see Johnny out there and cutting grass and it's during school time, but the parent can say, oh, we do lessons from 7 to 10 at night. I mean, Swanson versus Guthrie Independent School District, you cannot participate in school activities and courses as not a full-time student. And I think that's going to eventually change. But right now, by law, that you can't be in a private school, but then decide that you want to take physics, or if you're being homebound or home instruction, but you don't feel qualified to take physics, that I can go and have my child enrolled in physics class. Or maybe I love music and I want my child to learn how to be a great trumpet player. Or my son's going to have to get an athletic scholarship, so I want him to play on the football team. I want him homeschooled. Well, right now, that's not allowed. High School League doesn't allow it. The State Department doesn't allow it. And I'm telling you, the Tebow law is going to change. And I've been predicting this for the last 4 or 5 years, because think about it. I'm a taxpayer, whether I have a child in school or not. And if I'm paying taxes, I ought to be able to make some decisions with my child. I want my child to take physics, because I don't feel I can't even spell physics. I think it starts with an F. But it did start with an F with me, because that's what I ended up with. But bottom line is that, I mean, seriously, if I'm paying taxes and I'm paying for the schools, then my child ought to be allowed to play football, or my child ought to be allowed to take physics or band. And I think it's hard to argue with, but right now, it's kind of like you can't be a little bit pregnant, either you're pregnant or you're not, either you're going to be a full-time student or you're not, okay? All right, so that's my religion. Everybody got any questions about that?
Amen.
All right, amen. That's perfect. All right, I want to talk a couple of things I've got for you, just to keep you excited, and then we'll try to finish up. I've got, I think, 6 slides just kind of on Georgia laws that pertain to religion, and we've already kind of talked about it, but just kind of refresh your memory. And if you want to look them up, you can go to that Nexus and look them up if you want to. But basically 20-2-31.6.3, no high school which receives funding shall prohibit personal and voluntary religious expression of student athletes. Okay. 20-2-319, no law or regulation of this state shall prohibit or discourage a private school from conducting prayer prior to an athletic event held on the campus of the private school. There were several schools that were playing, public schools that were playing private schools, and then when the prayer was done, they maybe wanted to kind of back out. So again, they questioned that because they know they're not supposed to do that, and so by law, it makes it legal. And like you said, private schools have a lot more flexibility on things because you're paying and agreeing to certain things by that.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes, sir.
What if the public school's playing a private school? So if it's a home game in a private school, they can pray, but what if they're?
That's what the law says. I personally, if I were a private school and I would go to a public, I'd still do the prayers. That's what we do.
Okay.
I don't think there's a
That
whole
was my
bunch they
next
can do
question,
about
was
it.
could they do it at the public school?
That's, what's the people gonna do? I mean, they could refuse to play it, they do it, but I mean, I just think if I'm at a private school, and I'm going to public school, and we've had every day, every time we pray, we'll probably do it. Unless somebody challenges me. All right. Each public school classroom shall conduct a brief period of silent reflection, not more than 60 seconds, and we know that there's 35 stations do that, at least 35. And then immunization not required if parents object to religious beliefs. They've had all kinds of problems in New York about that, so we may eventually look at something on that one. And then I want to talk to you about the clubs and organization deal. And so that's a very successful high school football coach. Coach Brian has been leading his team in a prayer before the game for over 20 years. The prayer calls for the safety of the players and involves a fiery mixture of basketball pitchers and football. This practice has never generated any controversy. To the contrary, there's strong community support for Coach Brian's spirited pregame prayers, kind of like what y'all presented. And then this year, however, one new player and his parents objected, wishing to respect the will of the players. Coach Brian held a team vote on the issue, all but one. The student objected, voted to have Coach Brian continue leading the prayers. The students and parents sued the school district, claiming the coach-led prayers unconstitutional. Who do you think won?
Parents won.
The parents won, exactly. And that's what I want to tell you. You really can't have coaches leading the prayer. You possibly get away with it if the students, but even then, you can't make everybody participate. But see, here's what happens. If this student doesn't participate and it's a prayer, then he kind of stands out from the crowd, right? And you really can't have majority wins on everything. And I'll just give you a perfect example. You know, I like to pick on Keisha and Joma. Let's say that we all decided we wanted to go to a KKK rally. And let's vote on it. And all 8 members have to go, so let's have a vote. If I had 6 people to vote and 2 that didn't, that's not fair to y'all, right? Because, I mean, just because you're in the minority doesn't mean that you don't have rights. And it's the same thing here. You can't just say, we'll go to the will, because the law says that you should not, your coaches cannot lead in prayer because you're doing what? You're endorsing and promoting religion. And I'd go so far as to say, is even if you're having the prayer before the game was student-led, you probably still are leading, but in the Bible Belt, we probably get away with it some. Okay, the Adams County School Board approved a course in Bible studies as elected. The course presents an objective academic study of literature and historic qualities of the Bible. A group of parents sued the school system because the church-state separation prohibits public schools from offering Bible studies in the state-funded curriculum. Who's going to win this, the school district or the parents?
School win this one.
School win this one because it's not being forced, it's an elective, and it's really kind of being done as an academic study of literary and historic qualities. So that one would, I think, if it went to court, the school district would win. Okay, as part of their contractual duties, all teachers have agreed to serve as a supervisor for a student group. Mr. Smith, a teacher, is assigned to supervise a student religious group. Smith refuses the assignment because the beliefs of the group are contrary to his beliefs. The principal points out that Smith has agreed by contract to serve as a supervisor for a student group and that he was randomly assigned to this group. Further, the principal suggests that Smith must learn to accept an assignment must learn to be more religiously tolerant towards his students' beliefs. Smith refuses again, but states he would accept an assignment to another student group. The principal writes a formal letter of reprimand and threatens Smith with further employment action, in other words, to terminate him. Who would win this if it went to court?
Smith's going with that.
Principal?
Nope.
You can just make up your mind you don't want to do something and not do it?
Well, I think because it's the religion thing, plus Smith has said, hey, I'll do another group. I think that's why he'll win.
But the contract says you have to do a group.
Yeah.
And he's
no,
not saying he
I
wouldn't do a
another
group,
one,
he just said, I'll do another group.
And you're exactly right. The teacher would win this. And think about that, just like if we had, as I mentioned earlier, snake handlers group. If you assigned me to that one,
Man,
I wouldn't go within 100 yards. I just don't like those shoveless creatures, I'm sorry. Or what if another one was to have boiled peanuts and peanut butter and all that stuff, and what if I'm allergic to peanuts? And there are kids that are allergic to peanuts. So, again, if somebody really has a valid reason why they're objecting, you probably do need to give them some type of additional assignment, okay? Instruction, a parent group sues officials for allowing this practice, claiming it violates the statute clause.
I think the parents would win.
No, I think the schools.
Nah.
But what?
Is it on school
They're-
property?
They're excused from regular classes. That's
You're
why
allowed
that-
to
Well,
do
but
that.
by regular class, it could be an elective or something like that.
Right.
We're playing wordsmith, and that's good. What is
Edge of
the
the property.
edge of the property? Is it right next to the
Right.
property, or is it on the property? And so those are things that, like I said, when an attorney says it depends on the facts, you really gotta look at this. But assuming that they're not on the school campus,
Then it would be okay.
assuming that they're not missing physics to take that class, then it probably is something the school can do. You can allow students to leave school campus to do that.
Move the van 10 feet. Problem solved.
Okay, that's all of them, and
Oh,
we're gonna be through this.
Just cranking up.
Solve the world's problem.
Sure did. We got religion today, and now, next week, we gonna get school safety. Y'all gonna be safe and secure from now on, okay?